Did you find the place all right? You didn't get lost on the way over, did you? Why don't you grab the grapes and I'll grab the water? We'll go sit outside. Let's move that table under the tree. It's better here, right? I just moved in over here from next door. It was bigger there, but that was when I had my family, and now it's just me. Smaller is better. It's good to live minimally. I'll tell you something about minimalism. That Gandhi, he's a very wonderful, simple man, but what people don't know is that he sustained himself on this very exotic fruit juice, a very rare fruit. So we had these women traveling all over the place, working their fingers to the bone, making this wonderfully simple fruit juice. It's very funny. It's a very funny story. You know, Carl was a very political guy. He went around the world making documentary films. He was a labor union organizer. He was a leader on the left, the very far left. He was a communist for a while. It was a very different time. It was McCarthyism. He eventually went to jail for 3 years, and then tried to smuggle out a manuscript at some point and ended up in isolation for 6 months. He said that the difference between isolation and solitary confinement was the food. They didn't give you any in solitary confinement. He learned something valuable there, though, that he told me once, and I'll never forget. He said, man cannot live with too many people, but he cannot live alone. He'll go crazy. He always understood the plight of others. He was a very good man. He was a very special person. After Carl and I were married, we moved into one of his buildings. He owned 4 in Chelsea that he bought for $28,000. But it wasn't the Chelsea of today. It was a slum back then. They were all single resident occupancies, or SROs. Do you know that term? They were filled with drug users and prostitutes. But he went in and he took out all those tenants and moved them into another one of his buildings rent-free and got a crew of men. They were all Puerto Rican back then. Got a crew, taught these men a craft, and paid them when he could. But it was a good way. That's how you gentrify. He was a very fair man, being a labor union organizer. But that's how you gentrify, not like they do it today, where they force people out of their homes and into rents they can't afford, or move them outside of the city so they're further away from their work. It's not right, but this was right. This was a good way. I started writing because it was the only thing that I was ever good at. It was the only thing I could stand. The first thing I published was a story for the Condé Nast. I went to the south of France one year with my father, and after watching him draw this horrible picture of a tree, I wrote a story called Anyone Can Draw, and he sent it in to them, and they published it, and I was thrilled. I couldn't believe it. It was the most thrilling thing. And then another time in grammar school, I wrote a small short story, and I had to read it out loud in the class, and I was terrified. I wasn't very popular. But after I read it, all the kids had to write down on slips of paper what they thought of it. And I remember reading those slips, and they said things like, "Hey, Charlie," that's what they called me, Charlie. "That was great," or, "Gee, Charlie, you're really, really funny." I couldn't believe it. After years and years of writing and receiving tons of critical praise, I will never forget those little slips of paper. They were very important. Oh, people always ask if I do it on purpose. The political and feminist undercurrents are there because the sum of all my experiences, and those are the things that I experienced. I live in New York. There's a lot of single women in New York, so that's what I write about. My son got asthma for a few years when he was younger, and we moved to Puerto Rico. Once every year we go spend some months there, and when I was there I picked up the language and started weaving that into my work as well, a bit of the Spanish influence. And these are my experiences, and that's what I write about. And to be perfectly honest, people who say they're not political writers or otherwise, well, that's just not true. Politics is everywhere. Just like that Carol Hannish quote where she says, the personal is political. She's right. It influences all of our experiences. You know, I was always privileged and middle class. My husband Carl, now he was a worker. I was privileged. I wasn't always happy, but the money was there. But I was aware of the resources and the imbalance in the world. There's a poem by Blake that always haunted me. He wrote, every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight, and some are born to constant night. This is how I see the world. The condition that is screamingly and horrendously unfair. But you know, guilt doesn't do us any good. Hope does us good, and curiosity does us good. I will always be more curious than scared.